the jungle whispered. Thick, damp air wrapped around the landing zone like a predator's breath, suffocating and unseen. The Elnari Dominion's warships hovered above the dense canopy, their hulls gleaming under the Rick IV's sickly green sun. Steam hissed from hydraulic ramps as hundreds of reptilian soldiers stomped onto the soft, muddy earth. Their armored boots left deep impressions, a mark of conquest. General Zarkesh Vurak stood at the forefront, his scaled hand resting on the pommel of his plasma blade. He sneered at the towering trees, at the twisting vines, at the stench of rot in the air. Primitive. This world was nothing more than an inconvenience. A jungle, an untamed, archaic mess of greenery that meant nothing in the face of Dominion firepower. Pathetic, he muttered. His second-in-command, Captain Tharuk, gave a guttural chuckle. These humans believe they can fight us here? Let them try. They're nothing without their ships, their cities. We have the advantage. A squad of soldiers laughed, gripping their rifles tighter. Confidence dripped from them like sweat, thick with arrogance. They had crushed entire civilizations, burned planets to cinders. What was a jungle compared to plasma cannons and mechanized armor? The first mistake. The first drop of blood in the water. The jungle was watching. A rustling in the distance. A shift of shadow between the trees. One of the soldiers paused, his slit pupil eyes narrowing. Did you hear that? Zarkesh scoffed. The wind. Move forward. But there was no wind. The first patrol disappeared before sundown. No screams. No gunfire. Just gone. A 6-man scouting unit had ventured ahead, their exosuits scanning for movement. All channels went silent. When their locator beacons were finally activated, the signals weren't moving. They were scattered across a mile of jungle, pieces of them. The remains were found in the dark, strung up in the trees like grotesque trophies. Carved symbols marked their armor. Not human symbols. The jungle's symbols. A warning written in blood and bone. Zarkesh growled, his claws twitching. Clever. He didn't see the fear spread through his troops. The younger ones shifted on their feet, their tails flicking with unease. Some tightened their grips on their rifles. Their enemy hadn't just killed, they had sent a message. The second patrol fared no better. At dusk, they marched in a tight formation, rifles raised. Night vision scans flickered, glitching against the overwhelming foliage. A thick mist rolled in, thick enough to suffocate, curling between their legs. A whisper. A single voice. I see you. A plasma rifle fired into the trees, cutting through leaves, splintering bark. Nothing. The second voice. I hear you. Panic spread like infection. More rifles went off, lighting up the jungle in bursts of blue and red. The enemy wasn't there. Only whispers. Only the suffocating dark. Then screams. The first body hit the ground, gurgling, a knife buried deep in its throat. The second soldier collapsed, his own rifle turned against him. Shapes darted between the trees, faster than the Elnari could track. A flash of a blade. The wet crunch of a skull splitting open. They never saw them coming. By morning, Zarkesh stood in the center of the massacre, fists clenched. His men lay in the mud, throats slit, helmets cracked. There were no footprints. No signs of a struggle. Only corpses. Elias Mercer watched from above. Perched in the crook of a towering tree, his body painted in mud, he exhaled slow and steady. The Dominion had underestimated them, just as planned. They had marched in with their arrogance, their superior technology. They had no idea what real war looked like. Mercer pressed his calm. Phase 1 complete. A voice crackled back. Good. What's next? Mercer grinned. We make them afraid. Zarkesh's rage boiled over. He activated his comms, his voice like thunder. Burn it! Burn the damn jungle to the ground! Flamethrowers roared to life, scorching trees, turning the thick brush into an inferno. The Elnari soldiers cheered as the flames consumed the undergrowth, turning the once impenetrable jungle into smoldering ruins. They believed they had won. Mercer watched from the canopy, his expression unreadable. Then the wind shifted. A deep rumbling in the earth. The jungle groaned, as if alive. The flames flickered, then sputtered out. Something was coming. Zarkesh barely had time to react before the flood hit. Water, dark and surging, rushed through the burning wreckage, swallowing flames, sweeping Ulnari off their feet. Their armor, heavy with advanced plating, turned against them. Soldiers flailed, gurgling, drowning in the very jungle they had mocked. Mercer's men moved in. Blades flashed. Rifles fired in silence. The Ulnari, already gasping for breath, were torn apart in the chaos. The jungle had turned against them, and in the heart of the flood, Elias Mercer whispered, unseen, unheard, "You never stood a chance." Dawn broke over the jungle like a wound, bleeding light through the tangle of branches overhead. Smoke still clung to the air, thick and bitter from the fires the Ulnari had started, but the jungle refused to burn. The dense humidity smothered the flames before they could spread far, and the flood had done the rest. What was left was a charred, steaming battlefield littered with the bodies of drowned warriors and the silent ghosts of those who had vanished in the night. General Zarkesh stood at the edge of the destruction, watching as his remaining soldiers regrouped. They were fewer now. That much was obvious. The jungle had eaten them, swallowed them whole, leaving behind only wreckage. He bared his fangs in frustration, scanning the trees. They were out there. The humans. Not in force, not in formations like a proper army, but scattered, moving unseen between the vines and shadows. Stalking. A fresh squad, newly deployed from the warships above, marched through the mud toward him. These were the hardened elites, Dominion shock troopers clad in reinforced exosuits, each carrying enough firepower to level a small city. Zarkesh turned to Captain Thuruk, his claws flexing. "No more games. Fan out. Push forward. Every meter of this cursed jungle will be ours." Thuruk grunted, motioning to his troops. "Yes, General." The Ulnari moved with military precision, sweeping through the trees in disciplined squads, their weapons raised. Every rustling leaf was met with a plasma bolt, every shadow dissected by scanning beams. The jungle was thick, but their firepower was thicker. Step by step, they advanced, crushing undergrowth beneath their boots. A scream shattered the quiet. The squad closest to Zarkesh halted, weapons raised. Another cry, this one choked wet. One of their soldiers had fallen, his body limp, a gaping wound where his throat had been. No gunfire. No sign of an enemy. Zarkesh snarled. "Form up! Hold position!" The jungle did not obey. The first explosion came from above. A massive log, rigged with crude but effective explosives, dropped from the canopy, shattering a trio of warriors beneath its weight. The second came from below, the earth itself opening up as spike-laden pits claimed another squad. The third was the most chilling, a series of whispers, scattered through the foliage, each mimicking an Ulnari distress call. "Help me!" The jungle moaned in their own voices. "They're everywhere." Panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers turned their weapons toward the sound, only to find nothing but the trees, endless and unyielding. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, striking nothing but empty space. Then the real slaughter began. Figures moved in the mist, too fast, too silent. The Ulnari fired blindly, their weapons flashing in the gloom. They hit nothing. Shadows danced between the gaps, blades glinting. One by one, warriors fell, cut down with precise, efficient strikes. The jungle swallowed their screams. Zarkesh saw it clearly now. This was not war. This was a hunt. And they were the prey. His men broke formation, some stumbling backward, others wildly unloading their rifles into the trees. Mistake. A camouflaged figure dropped from above, a knife flashing across an exposed throat. Another warrior fell, his helmet crushed by a rock swung with terrifying force. The humans weren't fighting with superior weapons. They were fighting with the jungle itself. Using every vine, every shadow, every insect, every inch of terrain. And it was working. A heavy thud. Zarkesh turned just in time to see Captain Thuruk fall forward onto his knees, blood pouring from a gash in his side. A human stepped out from behind him, pushing the limp body aside. Elias Mercer. The man was covered in mud and foliage, his uniform indistinguishable from the jungle around him. His rifle hung loosely at his side, as if he had never needed it. The knife in his hand was stained with fresh blood. Zarkesh aimed his plasma pistol. Elias smirked. There was a sharp whistle, and then something struck the general's wrist, hard. Pain lanced up his arm as his pistol was knocked from his grip. Another whistle, and he felt the unmistakable pressure of a blade against his side, a distant cut, just deep enough to sting. Your first mistake, Elias said, his voice as calm as the wind through the leaves, was thinking the jungle was your enemy. Zarkesh lunged. Elias vanished. Not disappeared, not literally, but in the fraction of a second it took Zarkesh to swing his claws, Elias was already gone, slipping backward into the vines as if he had never been there at all. The general turned wildly, his instincts screaming, but there was nothing but the endless green stretching in every direction. No. Not nothing. The jungle was watching. Come out and fight! Zarkesh bellowed. A chuckle echoed from somewhere unseen. Oh, you are fighting. You just don't know it yet. A new sound rose then, a deep, unsettling hum, low and vibrating through the earth. At first, Zarkesh thought it was an engine, but no. It was something else. Something alive. The insects. From the trees above, from the damp ground below, they came. Thousands, then millions, swarming in a tide of writhing bodies, a living, breathing weapon. They filled the air, crawling into exposed armor joints, stinging, biting, injecting venom. Ulnari warriors screamed, slapping at their own bodies as the swarm engulfed them. Zarkesh staggered back, waving his claws wildly. His vision blurred, the stings igniting fire beneath his scales. He barely registered the sight of his men, collapsing in agony, clawing at their own faces, choking as the jungle itself rejected them. Then, just as suddenly, the swarm was gone. The jungle was silent. Zarkesh, panting, his body battered and trembling, forced himself to stand. He turned his gaze skyward, toward the dim patch of open sky beyond the canopy. He activated his calm. His voice, for the first time, was unsteady. Send reinforcements. The response was immediate. Sir, our scans are showing. I don't care what your scans are showing. We need. Silence. Static. Then a new voice. Elias. Oh, General. The human's voice drawled over the comms. There's no one left to send. Zarkesh's blood ran cold. He spun, searching the tree line, but there was nothing but the endless green. He snarled, raising his blade, but deep down, something inside him knew. The jungle had already won. Zarkesh sat motionless in the mud, his scales slick with sweat and filth. His breathing was ragged, his body aching from the relentless assault of the jungle. His warriors, what remained of them, huddled nearby, silent, exhausted. Their once pristine armor was caked in dirt and blood. The air was thick with humidity, but the chill running through his veins had nothing to do with the jungle's heat. He had lost half his forces. Not in battle, not in glorious combat, but to something far worse. Fear. A crackle over his calm broke the silence. General, enemy movements detected. There. The signal cut out. Zarkesh's claws twitched. He tapped his wrist console, switching to another channel. Static. Another. More of the same. Every frequency had been hijacked. Then, a voice came through. Low. Mocking. Oh, Zarkesh! Elias Mercer's voice hummed through the comms. Still standing, are we? The Ulnari general's jaw clenched. You think this is a game? A chuckle. It is. You're just not winning. Zarkesh exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain calm. You're nothing but vermin, Mercer. Hiding in the dark. Skulking in filth. Vermin? Elias mused. Funny. Your men seem to be the ones scurrying. Zarkesh's fists tightened. He turned to his remaining soldiers, scanning their weary expressions. They needed strength, not more fear. He muted the calms and straightened. We regroup. We find higher ground. No more running. A lieutenant hesitated. Sir, we. A sound cut him off. Not words. Not footsteps. Something deeper. A laugh. It came from everywhere at once, a haunting echo from the trees. More than one voice, more than one source. A chorus of amusement. Elias's men. Zarkesh turned sharply, his instincts flaring. Eyes up! Formation now! The Elnari scrambled into position, weapons raised, scanning the trees. The jungle was alive with whispers, mocking them. Their own voices, distorted and replayed. Where's your honor now? Cowards! They're watching! A rustle to the left. Another to the right. Zarkesh caught a flicker of movement, too fast to track. Shadows slipping between vines, darting between the towering trunks. Then a scream. One of his soldiers, gone. Dragged into the foliage, his rifle clattering to the ground. Another scream. Another warrior vanished, yanked into the dark. Panic surged through the ranks. The soldiers opened fire, plasma bolts cutting through the jungle, striking nothing but trees. Zarkesh didn't move. He couldn't afford to. He forced himself to listen, to think. The humans were leading them, driving them towards something. He turned sharply. Back! Fall back! Too late. The first explosion knocked him off his feet, sending debris and dirt skyward. The ground collapsed beneath them, swallowing warriors into concealed sinkholes lined with sharpened stakes. Zarkesh hit the mud hard, rolling to a knee as his ears rang. He reached for his weapon, his vision swimming, and saw the battlefield shifting. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Figures emerged from the undergrowth, clad in mud and camouflage, blending into the jungle like ghosts. Humans. Silent. Calculated. They moved in unison, not rushing, not reckless. They advanced as if they had already won. Zarkesh's blood burned. He would not die like this. He rose to his full height, baring his fangs. A towering, armored predator. Fight me! He roared. Elias Mercer stepped forward. Not rushed. Not eager. Measured. Why? The human asked simply. Zarkesh snarled. You hide. You whisper. You kill from the dark. You think this is war? Elias tilted his head. This isn't war, General. He lifted a hand. His men vanished back into the jungle. This is survival. The jungle breathed. A moment of stillness before the final blow. Then the Elnari fell. Blades slashed through armor. Gunfire erupted at close range, precise and merciless. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a purge. Zarkesh fought. He refused to fall, cutting down 2 humans with a savage arc of his blade. But it wasn't enough. His warriors were collapsing, one after another. Not by overwhelming firepower. By strategy. By understanding the terrain better than he ever could. A searing pain lanced across his side. He staggered, dropping to one knee. A knife buried between his ribs. Elias stood over him. Calm. Still breathing normally, not a hint of exertion in his expression. You never had a chance, the human murmured. Zarkesh's vision blurred. He refused to look away. He would not give Mercer the satisfaction. His voice, hoarse, growled through clenched teeth. Finish it. Elias crouched, retrieving his knife with a smooth motion. He wiped the blade against his sleeve and met Zarkesh's gaze with something the general could not place. Pity. I don't have to, Elias said softly. The jungle already has. Zarkesh collapsed. The last thing he heard was the whisper of leaves as the jungle closed in. Zarkesh awoke to silence. His body throbbed with pain, the wound in his side a burning reminder of his failure. His mind swam in and out of focus as he forced himself upright. He was alone. The jungle stretched around him, thick and unrelenting, the canopy suffocating any hope of clear sky. He touched his side, feeling the dried blood crusted over the gash. The human had spared him. Spared him. That realization cut deeper than the knife itself. His warriors were gone. Not just killed, removed. Taken by the jungle, leaving no trace. The battlefield had been wiped clean, as if they had never existed. The stench of death lingered, but the bodies were missing. A message. He reached for his calm static. Then, a whisper. "You're wasting your time." Zarkesh's head snapped up, eyes scanning the trees. His claws flexed around his plasma blade. He was exposed. Vulnerable. Every instinct screamed at him to move, but he stayed still, forcing his breathing to steady. Another whisper. This time closer. "You still think you can win?" "Elias." Zarkesh exhaled sharply. "Coward," he muttered. A chuckle. "You keep saying that." A rustle behind him. Zarkesh spun, slashing his blade in a wide arc, but it cut through empty air. "Nothing. You're making it too easy." Elias's voice teased from the dark. Zarkesh's pulse pounded. He knew this tactic. The humans were hurting him, playing with his mind, breaking him before the final strike. His soldiers had fallen for it. He would not. He forced himself forward, moving with purpose, not reacting to the sounds around him. His mind sharpened, pushing away exhaustion. He needed higher ground. A vantage point. Somewhere he could regroup, plan, fight on his terms. A clearing ahead. He surged toward it, steps quick but deliberate. The jungle remained still. No whispers. No rustling. Had they let him go? No. Too easy. Zarkesh slowed as he stepped into the open space. A clearing, circular, ringed with massive roots that jutted from the ground like jagged bones. Something about it felt wrong. Then he saw them. Ulnari warriors. Dozens. Maybe more. Their bodies hung from the trees, stripped of armor, their flesh marked. Carvings. Symbols. Some human. Some alien. Some older than any language Zarkesh knew. A pit settled in his gut. This wasn't just warfare. This was something else. A low voice rumbled behind him. "Do you understand now?" Zarkesh turned slowly. Elias stood at the edge of the clearing, his body painted in mud, his knife still in hand. He looked more like the jungle itself than a man. The Ulnari bared his teeth. "You think this is war?" Elias tilted his head. "War ended the moment you landed." Zarkesh tightened his grip on his weapon. "You're not soldiers. You're animals." A smirk. "Says the lizard in the cage." The realization struck before he could react. The trees shifted. Moved. A trap. The ground beneath his feet gave a low creak, and suddenly, the roots weren't roots anymore. They were woven structures, barriers, encircling the clearing. He had been led exactly where they wanted him. A single shot rang out. Zarkesh barely dodged, the plasma bolt searing past his face. He lunged sideways, rolling behind one of the thick root structures, only to hear another shot, closer. Not random. Not wild gunfire. Precise. Calculated. He was being toyed with. Elias's voice rang out from the trees. "Come on, General. Fight me." Zarkesh growled. He pushed forward, weaving through the clearing, searching for an escape. His heartbeat thundered in his skull. They weren't going to kill him quickly. They were going to drag it out. Make him feel every moment of his own failure. No. Not like this. He leaped onto one of the root structures, clawing his way up, forcing his aching limbs to move. If he could reach the treetops, call for reinforcements. A sharp snap beneath him. A vine. No. The net sprang up, yanking him into the air. Pain flared through his body as he crashed against the tangle of rope and wood, suspended above the clearing like a prize catch. Elias stepped into view, rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. He watched Zarkesh dangle, his expression unreadable. The Ulnari thrashed, roaring in frustration. "Kill me and be done with it!" Elias sighed. "You still don't get it." He stepped forward, crouching at the base of the trap, staring up at Zarkesh as if he were disappointed. You never mattered. The words struck deeper than any wound. You thought this was your war. Elias continued, voice calm. Your grand invasion. Your moment of conquest. He gestured to the jungle around them. This place isn't yours to take. Never was. You're not a conqueror, General. His gaze hardened. You're just another animal that wandered too far into the dark. The jungle whispered in agreement. Zarkesh's breathing came fast, his vision swimming with fury. He wouldn't accept this. He was a warrior. A predator. Not prey. He grabbed the knife from his belt, slicing through the net's bindings with savage force. The fibers snapped, and he fell, hard, hitting the mud with a grunt. He ignored the pain, springing to his feet, claws bared. Elias didn't even reach for his weapon. Zarkesh charged. A sharp sting. His body froze mid-motion. He couldn't move. His vision blurred. Limbs heavy. Lungs tightening. Poison. Elias let out a slow breath. You really shouldn't touch random plants in the jungle, General. Zarkesh's knees buckled. He collapsed, body locking up, his breath shallow. His vision swam with green, the jungle warping around him. Elias crouched beside him, voice low. The good news? It won't kill you. Just paralyze you for a few hours. Zarkesh could only stare, trapped inside his own body. Elias patted his shoulder. The bad news? He stood, stepping away. You'll be awake the whole time. Zarkesh heard the first sounds of something moving in the underbrush. Not humans. Something else. Elias walked away, his voice trailing into the distance. Try not to scream too much. The jungle swallowed the rest. Zarkesh couldn't move. His body was stone, every muscle locked under the weight of the jungle's poison. His breath came in slow, shallow gasps, his vision flickering between clarity and haze. Somewhere in the distance, Elias Mercer had vanished, leaving him alone. No, not alone. The jungle was watching. A rustling to his left. Then to his right. Soft, deliberate movements. Not the humans. Something else. Zarkesh's heartbeat pounded in his skull. He strained to turn his head, but the venom held him frozen, a prisoner inside his own body. His fingers twitched uselessly in the damp soil. The sounds came closer. Sniffing. Chuffing. The unmistakable clicking of mandibles. A shadow passed over him, blocking the dim glow of the jungle's bioluminescent fungi. Then another. Then another. The creatures moved in a slow, deliberate circle, examining him. Scavengers. Nocturnals. The jungle's cleanup crew. Zarkesh had seen them before from orbit, then Rick-carrion beasts, insectoid predators that stalked the dead, feeding on the weak. He had dismissed them as insignificant, barely worth consideration. Now they towered over him. One of the creatures lowered itself, its elongated face tilting as it studied him. A single, serrated appendage prodded his chest plate, tapping against the metal. Testing. Zarkesh forced a growl, though it came out as little more than a breath. The beast hesitated, its head twitching at the sound. Its mandibles spread wide, revealing layers of hooked teeth. It knew. He was alive. But it didn't care. It lowered its jaws. Zarkesh's body refused to react. His mind screamed, rage and terror mixing in his veins. Not like this. He was a general. A warrior of the Dominion. He would not be reduced to carrion to prey. The creature's teeth scraped against his exposed scales near the wound Elias had given him. The pain flared sharp, hot, then vanished. A whistle cut through the air. The beast froze. Another whistle, low, controlled. A command. The carrion creatures hesitated, their bodies going rigid, then, as one, they slunk backward into the foliage. Their eyes lingered on him, as if reluctant to leave their meal behind, but something stronger pulled them away. Elias. He stepped into view, rifle still slung over his shoulder, watching the creatures vanish into the trees. His expression was unreadable. Zarkesh's chest heaved as his breath came back in ragged bursts. His limbs were still numb, but he could feel a slow return of movement, a painful crawl of sensation through his body. He clenched his fist weakly, the first voluntary motion in what felt like an eternity. Elias crouched in front of him. Not your best moment, huh? Zarkesh glared. His throat was dry, his words like gravel. Kill me! Elias exhaled, tilting his head. Still on that? I will not be a trophy. A flicker of amusement crossed the human's face. Oh, Zarkesh! You still don't get it. Elias stood and gestured to the jungle around them. This isn't about trophies. It's about lessons. The numbness in Zarkesh's arms began to fade. He pressed his palms against the dirt, forcing himself to push up. His muscles burned, his balance unsteady, but he managed to stand. His body was battered, his armor dented, his honor in shambles. He locked eyes with Elias. What lesson? Elias didn't move. You walked into my home thinking your numbers, your tech, your rank meant something. He gestured at the jungle. But out here? None of that matters. The jungle doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what armies you command. Zarkesh's claws curled. You think you've won? Elias's expression darkened. I know I have. The wind shifted. A distant sound echoed through the trees, engines. The Dominion fleet. Finally. Elias sighed. Guess that means it's time for you to go. Zarkesh's head snapped up. You're letting me leave? Elias smiled. Cold. Sharp. Calculated. Not letting you. Making you? Zarkesh's claws flexed, but Elias took a step closer, voice dropping. You're going to get back on your ship, you're going to tell your Dominion what happened here, and you're going to live with it. Zarkesh's jaw tightened. He would be a disgrace. The general who lost to ghosts in the trees. Elias leaned in. Soft. Dangerous. You think you hate me? His voice was barely a whisper. Just wait until you see what your own kind thinks of you. A cold shiver ran through Zarkesh's spine. The Dominion did not reward failure. His gaze flickered to the jungle. The jungle had given him a choice. The Dominion would not. Elias stepped back. Your fleet's waiting. Zarkesh stood frozen. The weight of the jungle, the battle, the humiliation crushing down on him. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he turned. He walked away. Not out of surrender. Out of survival. The jungle watched him leave. Elias Mercer remained, standing in the thick green, watching the Ulnari vanish through the trees, back toward the waiting warships. A soldier beside him shifted. Should have killed him! Elias exhaled. No. The soldier frowned. Why? Elias turned, eyes sharp as the jungle around him. Because dead men don't tell horror stories.